the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom that's being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Welcome, everybody, to my podcast, What's the Biggs Ideas? We release it on a regular basis. I am a congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. This is a border state, but I don't live right on the border. I live in the Phoenix metro area. I am joined today. I am so excited because I admire this gentleman's work. He has worked so hard to secure our borders. He has been a policy advisor for President Trump, senior advisor. He's also been the communications director for Jeff Sessions. He is the founder and president of American First Legal Foundation, and he is the great, capable leader now of the America First Legal Foundation, Stephen Miller. Stephen, thanks for taking some time to be with me today.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so much happens, right? I mean, every 24, 48 hours, the left has made a new assault on the United States of America and our fundamental rights and freedoms. And so I want to talk about some of the things that have taken place recently. And foremost on my mind is this crazy notion of President Biden to, without authority, even Nancy Pelosi a year ago said he had no authority to do this, but he said he's going to forgive student loan debt that could cost up to $1 trillion over 10 years. Stephen, is this a midterm election gimmick? Is this, what's driving this crazy thing for Joe Biden?
Well, actually, it appears that it's hurt him politically. He seems to have dropped at least several points in the polls since he issued the executive action wiping away at least $1 trillion in student debt, although nobody really knows how much ultimately this is going to cost. And the reason I think for both the motivation behind it and then also the miscalculation politically is that the White House is staffed disproportionately by the very kind of person who is likely to have a lot of useless degrees that nobody needs. So, in other words, if you were to imagine a group of people who studied a lot of things that are completely useless, a total waste of time, and have no practical value, it would be the people working in Joe Biden's White House. I mean, this is your case study in somebody who's going to get a certificate in cultural Marxism as a graduate program, right, in an Ivy League school, to then spend the rest of their lives trying to work out their psychological issues on the rest of us. And so in their own little hermetically sealed bubble, they thought, man, this will be so popular. We're going to wipe away all of this student debt for people like us. And of course, in reality, what we know is that not only does 85% of the country either not have student debt because they did not attend college, or because they had a debt that they paid, or because perhaps they attended a community college or a trade school or a vocational school. Not only is that true, but the student debt is disproportionately held by people who have graduate and postgraduate degrees. So it's not the person, although there are certainly people in this group who, of course, have student debt, but the largest amounts are people who have spent a decade never leaving the college campus, getting one useless degree after another, and they want us to, of course, bail them out. Now, we all agree that college is way too expensive. But of course, anyone who studied this issue realizes it's because the federal government has been subsidizing the tuition bubble for decades now. Ask yourself, what will it do to the price of college that we've established the precedent that a president of the United States can magically transfer every single penny of student debt to people who never went to college. Colleges are going to endlessly increase the cost of tuition, and future student borrowers, seeing this precedent, are going to take out debts knowing they can't pay them on the expectation that a future president will bail them out. So they made a grave political miscalculation. I think it's actually angered, but I know it's angered millions and millions of Americans who are frankly outraged that they're being asked to put in an extra shift at the diner or the construction site or as a nurse at the hospital, paying the student debt of somebody who owes, $500,000 because they could never leave NYU. And the other thing that's, I think, more alarming than all of that, of course, which you as a congressman uniquely appreciate, is that by going around Congress, by doing this unilaterally, after we've had, a couple decades of legislative debate about whether or not to do it, and ultimately there was never support in Congress to pass this kind of debt transfer. It was never there. The bill would have died, if not in the House, certainly in the Senate, but probably in the House too. And so for a president to take it upon himself to write a law that could not pass Congress is to very much move us away from a democracy and towards a more almost imperial regime. And so it's very dangerous to our whole constitutional order.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack. You hit on all of these really critical and important aspects of this. I mean, whether it's the imperial presidency, which is consistent with the way Biden has operated. I mean, more executive orders than anybody else ever, coming in basically to wipe away all the policies that secured the border, that gave us energy independence, whatever it was. He did those right away, and then he kind of saved this one up. And I gotta believe that the lefties, as you say, that surround him in the White House. And by the way, it's indicative of the leftward lean of the United States Congress, which is out of step with the vast majority of Americans today as well. I mean, so here's a way to think of it. The Progressive Caucus might have had 12, 15 people in it just 6 years ago. But now today, and by the way, the Progressive Caucus, that's where the hardcore socialists, fascists, communists live in Congress. There's over 100 of those today in the United States Congress. So it's really gone hard left.
And the people who aren't members of the Progressive Caucus agree with him on everything. They're just too lazy to show up to meetings. But I was a congressional staffer for just shy of 10 years. I worked on the Budget Committee, the Judiciary Committee. I worked for, in fact, you may remember her. I worked for Michelle Bachmann from Minnesota.
Sure.
She was my first boss. And I can remember, even back when I was on the Hill, you had a pretty large, they called it the Blue Dog caucus in the House of at least self-styled conservative Democrats. Now, we could debate how authentic that was. But at least on paper, there was a group of congressmen in the House that ostensibly were a little bit more moderate, a little bit more centrist. Now the Democrat conference in the House is comprised entirely of people who fit somewhere between the far left and the socialist left, but entirely within that boundary.
Yeah, I will mention his name because I like him, but Henry Cuellar, right? So Henry Cuellar is in trouble in South Texas. Henry Cuellar is perhaps the last close to moderate Democrat in the United States Congress. I mean, he's a pro-life guy. He's a pro-traditional family guy. He's a Catholic guy who believes in the Catholic values, and he votes that way. He thinks that's where his constituency is as well. But he's the very last guy that you're going to see as a moderate in the Democrats today. And that,
the tragedy of Henry Cuellar is that, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. I'm just saying this as a private citizen. I realize that you have to see the guy every day, or not every day, but at least from time to time. The tragedy of Henry Cuellar is that when the House voted on the Build Back Better program, like is so often the case, instead of showing just a shred of political independence and saying no to Nancy Pelosi, and you see this all the time, when Pelosi knocks on his door, when Biden knocks on his door or calls him on the phone, as the case may be, he falls in line. And so often, even with the last remaining member here or there who might be more moderate in their beliefs, when their vote is needed by their leaders, they get it every single time. And I think Republicans who watch the House from a distance marvel at that difference between the two parties, where if the House needs to pass a far left socialist piece of legislation, they will never fail. They will never fail. But if in the past, I think it'll be different in the future. But in the past, if we had to pass a really important conservative bill, all of a sudden you have members that are like, well, I don't know about this and not about that, and I'm not sure about this. And so conservative legislation tended to never go anywhere. And so we're going to have to learn as conservatives, particularly in 2023, that for key conservative priorities, everybody's going to have to band together and get those bills across the finish line.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the problem is, as you say, I mean, I was speaking earlier this week, and somebody who was a little bit more moderate than I am, let's say, and most people would say everybody's a little bit more moderate than me, but that's not the point. The point is, what he said to me was, you guys, and I don't ever use the term rhino, but he says, you guys need to quit using the term rhino. I said, well, I don't use that term, and he said, well, that's you're off-putting. You're off-putting to the more moderate Republican. I said, look, I've been doing this long enough to be able to tell you this. For years, when there was a moderate Republican that was the candidate, the nominee for the Republican Party, I was told, Andy, you need to shut up and suck it up and vote for the more moderate Republican nominee. And I, as much as it pained me, I said, well, the Democrat was almost always a lot worse. And so, of course, I would support someone I agreed with 65% of the time instead of someone I agreed with only 0% of the time. I said, so guess whose turn it is now? You need to suck it up and vote for the more conservative Republicans, because that's who the candidates are and the nominees are, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, and the same will apply to the actual process of writing bills. I mean, if you look at the Bush era as an example, so George Bush controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate for 6 years, right? They lost it in 2006. That was when public discontent with, in particular, the Iraq War was at a fever pitch, and so they lost the majority. But for 6 years, he had the House and the Senate and the White House, and the only real major piece of legislation that was passed of any lasting consequence, there were some little things, I don't have time to get into all of it, was No Child Left Behind. So the only, they finally muscled all together to do what? To make the Department of Education bigger and more powerful and federal bureaucrats more intrusive in our lives. That's over with. That's done. Donald Trump swept that all out. He cleaned house. We have a new party. We have a new mantra. We have a new day. And rest assured, people like Andy Biggs will make sure that if Republicans are in the majority in 2023, it will not be like old times.
Yeah, and that is exactly right, Stephen. And so that's a great segue. That's a great segue into the current unifier in chief, President Joe Biden. He stood before the gates of hell, the seventh circle of Dante's Inferno, and I'm still baffled. I'm wondering, is this the same Hollywood producer who is producing the January 6th committee? I mean, this was absolutely crazy. So we're going to play a clip from that, and then I want to get your feedback, because I know that you, like me, are in the half of the country that he dislikes so very much. Yeah. So hey, Paul, can you play that clip for us, please?
And now, America must choose to move forward or to move backwards, to build a future or obsess about the past, to be a nation of hope and unity and optimism, or a nation of fear, division, and of darkness. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies. But together we can choose a different path.
you got to appreciate the manic, almost schizophrenic speech there. Light and unity, except for those MAGA guys, and then they're dark, and then but we're going to be unified again.
There's a lot to unpack in this speech, and I feel that people will be studying it for a long time. But I mean, to me, the sad thing is just that a president's job is to bring the country together, and President Trump worked so hard at that for 4 years, and we made a point of always having his speeches be unifying and uplifting, and that was so important to him as president. And you can go back and you can look at so many of the speeches that President Trump gave, and they were designed to bring the country together, to remind us about all the things that we love and cherish, that unify us as Americans. And so, not to get too philosophical, but it's the president's job to find what's best in the American spirit and to use that as a way to unite the country. And so when President Trump, for example, gave so many of his big speeches, like his State of the Union addresses to Congress, which I know you were at, he went to such great lengths to say over and over again in these speeches, and I remember them so well, to say, I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. What I care about is that you're an American. What I care about is that you want to have a good job. You want to have a good school for your kids. You want to live in a safe country, a happy country, a prosperous country. And so, the media never gave him credit for it. And of course, that doesn't surprise you, and it doesn't surprise me. We know what the media is like. You deal with them every day. But those of us who were paying attention, we heard a president for 4 years who tried so hard, in spite of all the media negativity, all of the attacks, to say, let's use patriotism as a foundation to build a greater country and to build a more unified country. And now you have President Biden, who he should know better. He should know better. He's not so dumb. He's not such a fool and an idiot that he doesn't understand, at least at some level, that the president is supposed to bring people together, not to divide people. And yet he is clearly, and this is not hyperbole, he is clearly the most divisive president of our lifetimes. And it's not even close. Like, if you were to make a list with number 1, Joe Biden, I mean, number 2 is so far down the list from him that they're not even in the same league, in the same universe. We should demand better of our leaders. And so I hope in these midterms that Democrats, that people maybe who've been Democrats their whole lives will say, I can't vote for a party that's going to try to tear this country in two.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot to unpack there, but you're right, because as you were saying it, I was thinking, I really can't think of a more divisive president. I mean, Jimmy Carter, I think back to Jimmy Carter. People just rejected him. Ultimately, they said the job's bigger than Jimmy Carter, right? I mean, but nobody was really divided as a nation. Ronald Reagan, when he was the president, the Democrats, they didn't like his policies. They had fun. They had a good time making fun of him. But you know what? They still loved America. Joe Biden, I think, in some ways, is reflective of how the Democratic Party has moved so far to the left.
Yes.
And which is a result, I mean, of too many people getting too many bad degrees our
education system, which it is all connected. These are all related points. Our education system has radicalized the Democratic Party. It's radicalized the whole entertainment industry. These people who get degrees that go on to be writers for so many of the shows that you watch that don't reflect our values. It's radicalized the legal profession. It's certainly radicalized so many of the professional class that operate in so many sectors of our economy. Like, in other words, everything from our financial sector to our technology sector, right? It's all incubated in this stew of Marxism that is our education system from from preschool to PhD, which is really breathtaking when you think about it.
And don't forget, I mean, also, so I often say this when I'm speaking, is every institution now is dominated by a radical Marxist left-wing thinking. So, I mean, it could be, I mean, look at, when was the last time you thought that corporate boardrooms were going to be bevies of Marxist or critical race theory, or critical theory of any kind? It just wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. 30 years ago,
Right.
I was disappointed because so many of them seemed to be, they were globalizing. They cared more about profits from China than the U.S. But you didn't ever feel like they were overtly anti-American.
Yes,
and
and
so
yeah. I mean, you've hit all the key points. So you mentioned critical theory, right? Of which critical race theory, as you were suggesting, is a subordinate component. So critical theory, which is a Marxist pedagogy, comes out of our university system. And I mean, you can trace its origins, which we don't have time for now, even back further than what I'm going to say. But in the 1970s, you see a big emphasis on critical theory and Marxist studies and trying to demolish what you would think of as normal Western traditions and values. And so it took a while, but we're now living in a country where that kind of thinking has dominated, as you say, every institution in American life, to the point where our Fortune 500 companies are every bit as progressive and every bit as wacky and every bit as just radical as AOC. I mean, again, it's hard to understand, right? If you haven't studied these things, but you could go to any boardroom in corporate America, and they would vote the same on any cultural or social resolution as AOC would on any given day of the week. And it's because there's been complete institutional capture. There's been a steady process of infiltrating these institutions. So while your constituents live their lives, they work hard, they raise their kids, they pay their taxes, they go about the business of leading a good and fulfilling life, you have these progressive radicals that, instead of having families, instead of working in a normal industry in a normal productive fashion, they devoted their lives to activism and nothing but activism. And now we are living in a world in which, while we have been effectively just living our lives as best we can, we wake up in a world that is unrecognizable to us.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets to the point where you have these full-time activists, and you've seen them, and I know some people that's all they've done for 30 years now. Multiple graduate degrees, thoroughly indoctrinated. Well, they're the ones that are dividing the country, because they're trying to emasculate America's traditions, values, and history. And in so doing, they've just radicalized every institution. But that gets back to what we were talking about with Joe Biden.
Yes.
In that speech, he was reflective of the left's position. But more than just reflective of that, he projected that divisiveness, that hatred that he says that MAGA Americans have. MAGA Americans don't hate these people. MAGA Americans just, most people in America, we're still a right-leaning country for the most part, I think. They just want to live their lives. They want to go on vacation when they can. They're working to get their kid. They want their kid to get a degree. They have a better life than they're having. But it's not going to happen with this administration. It's not going to happen with this trajectory.
This is so important. This is the reason why the Republican Party had to change, because there are a lot of reasons, but a big one is because passivity in the face of these kinds of incursions is a recipe for absolute destruction and defeat.
Absolutely.
And this is what was not understood. Again, to your point, Republicans just wanted to be left alone. Normal Americans just want to be left alone. Let's say that you're working as a bank teller. That's your job. You want to go to your job, make your income, save up enough money to take one nice vacation a year with your family. You want to be able to see a movie on the weekend. You want to be able to do normal things and live a normal life. But you're faced with an opposition that wants to turn your city into a hellhole, right? Like you see in San Francisco right now. Take away everything you have, ruin your life, ruin your schools, ruin your neighborhoods, drugs and crime everywhere, open borders. unlivable conditions. You can't be passive in the face of that. You need a Republican Party that is capable of going on offense against the radical left, and that's why Joe Biden's speech is such a monstrous example of demagoguery, because what he's doing is he's saying that the normal people, the people who do just want to follow the law and live a good life and raise a good family, are the extremists. But he and his party, the people who don't believe in jails for criminals, who don't believe in borders, right, who don't believe in the idea that men are men and women are women, who believe that little children need to be masked 24 hours a day, that these people are the centrists. I mean, they're the extremists, and he's slandering everyone who disagrees with his extreme agenda as being the problem. That's revolutionary rhetoric. That is the rhetoric of a movement that is committed to dismantling every structure of Western civilization.
Oh my goodness, you're exactly right. And so I just wrote an op-ed that'll be published, I think, tomorrow, if not today. And I'm talking about disintegration. So if you look back at nations that have disintegrated, we have a lot of those hallmarks of disintegration. And it's when all the institutions get captured. Now we have enough left to overcome that trajectory to or that devolution to disintegration. But it doesn't come when your leader, when your president of the country is saying, those of you who, as you said, are not extreme, there's nothing radical about the average American. There's nothing radical about the average Republican or even the average Democrat, who just simply want to live their life. They want to, they want to have personal relationships that are valuable. They want to be safe when they go public. They don't want to have their culture sensibilities assaulted by a radical minority constantly. He is undermining and moving us towards disintegration. And that is why you can't, I agree with you 100%. You can't apathetically stand on the sideline and watch that happen. And I laugh about what's going on in California. So let's just as a measure, because you mentioned San Francisco. Arizona's next door. We get people from California. I always beg them and say, welcome to Arizona. We're glad you're here. Please do never vote to turn us into California, whatever you do. But here's the deal. You got Gavin Newsom. And by the way, California is run by commissions now. You know who else was run by commissions? The former Soviet Union was. Communist nations run by commissions. And California runs by commissions. So they have a commission that comes out and says, no more gas cars by 2035. No more water desalination at all. And that's their coastal commission. These commissions control. And with that control, they basically run the country. They're unelected. They're appointed by the governor. And now Gavin Newsom, within a week, says, hey, don't charge up your electric vehicle because our power grid is overtaxed because it's hot here right now. And by the way, we're going to have to extend the life of 5 years to the nuclear plant that we were trying to shutter. And this kind of, it's pretzel logic. It's not even logical. It's an emotional response to some indoctrination that they've received. How do you overcome that?
Yes, it's tough. And so a few points that I want to make on what you just said. Picking up the energy piece, I think most people have realized by now that the left's anti-energy agenda has never been about the climate. It's always been about control. Mm-hmm. And a great example of this, of course, is the left's half-century war against nuclear power. So if you were to have even a few nuclear power plants in key locations, you would have infinitely inexpensive and renewable energy. In other words, you would have a limitless supply of energy that's both cheap and then, again, renewable. And so you would never have any grid problems whatsoever. And by the way, if carbon is your thing, if you're into carbon, there's no carbon emissions. So congratulations. Right. And the left is the reason why there has not been a renewable energy grid in this country, again, for the last 50 years. And now, rather than saying, oh, we were wrong, it's no. we need to ban your automobiles. It's like, okay, fine, we'll buy an electric car. Oh no, sorry, grid doesn't work. You can't charge your electric car now either, right? It's all about power and control. And, whether they're using, sometimes it's the environment, sometimes it's false allegations of racism, sometimes it's false allegations about, people that are, taking advantage of the system, so like small business owners that need to be beat up on, that are just trying to earn a living. Whoever the bad guy is at that moment is just their justification for exerting more power and control over people's lives. That's why a strategy of accommodation or appeasement will never work. So, case in point, look at the trajectory of the gender issue. So, I think for a long time, conservative Americans thought, when they were pushing the LGBTQIA+, now I have the full acronym agenda, right? That they thought, well, I'll meet you halfway. Then they had some new crazy demand, and I'll meet you halfway. A new crazy demand, I'll meet you halfway. So we've been doing this, for 20 years, changing our traditional notions of human relations, our traditional notions of marriage, our traditional notions of family, our traditional notions of what it is to be male, what it is to be female, right? So now, did the left, having received all of these accommodations, all of the compromise from the right, did they wake up one morning and say, okay, we have everything we want now. We have everything we want. We're done. We're going to leave you alone. We're going to leave your kids alone. We're satisfied. No. Like a rapacious beast, the political left always demands more. So now what's the new demand? Now the new demand is that your children in their schools, without your awareness, must pledge allegiance to the transgender ideology. If any student in that school, presumably through pressure from their own teachers, is a male and wants to be a female, or a female wants to be a male, you are obligated to so treat them, to so refer to them. If a man wants to use a woman's locker room, you are to accept it. If a man wants to use a woman's restroom, you are to obey. You are not to question it. And if you do, you'll be kicked out of school, and we'll probably call child services on your parents too. So there is no stop point. They will keep going and going and going. Accommodation will never work.
No, I agree with you 100%. And we see that. I'm seeing teachers that are fired because they either mistakenly use the wrong pronoun. I mean, we've reached this kind of quasi-totalitarian system that's going on right now, and it is about control. Hey, Stephen, we are out of time, but I want to. What's your social media? How can people follow you and find out more about what you do and get to America First Legal?
Thank you. So my email address my social media address for anyone who wants to follow me online is at Stephen M. That's at Stephen STEPHN at Stephen M. Or the same handle for True Social at Stephen M. And that's Stephen with the PH. And before we sign off, let me just say, Congressman, that I think it's important for your constituents to hear. What a leader you have been. We touched on it a little bit today, but what a leader you have been on the immigration and border security issue. And you talk about the fall of a nation. A nation that doesn't have a border is in a doom spiral. And we are very far along that process right now. And you have been a warrior on this issue. And the most important task, in my view, that a new Congress will have, and there are a lot, we've talked about a lot of them today, in 2023, is going to be holding this administration to account over its eradication of our southern border.
Well, thanks, Stephen. I really appreciate that, because when I was talking about disintegration, indicias of disintegration, the first and most overt one is territorial encroachment and infirmity in your ability to hold territory or sovereignty. And that's where we are today. I know you've been on that for a long time as well, and I appreciate all of your effort and your work. You follow Stephen at America First Legal. They do a great job. You can follow me at Rep. Andy Biggs AZ on Truth or Twitter. On Instagram, I'm at Rep. Andy Biggs. And if you want the audio version of this podcast, You can go to Spotify or Apple Podcast and just go to What's the Big's Idea. Stephen, man, I could talk to you for hours on end. Just fascinating. Thank you so very much. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for your leadership. And with that, we're signing out till the next episode. Thank you.